Welcome back. You're listening to a special edition of Ask the CIO, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Lawrence Brewer, the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. Government at the National Archives and Records Administration, and Lisa Harlampus, the Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach, also at NARA. Lawrence, before break, you talked a little bit about, you mentioned this idea of the capstone program, and that's where I want to go first, because this is one of those programs that is really going to help agencies get their, if you will, arms around this challenge of records management. What is this capstone program, and how is it helping agencies make this transition towards a all electronic approach to records management?
So Jason, great idea. Let's talk about capstone some more. So it was originally an idea that came out in the 2012 Managing Government Records Directive, and it's been carried over to the M1921 current directive that we're working with agencies on. And I think the reason why it's really been successful is because it focuses on a type of record, email, that I think universally everybody recognizes that this was something that we had to get our arms around, that we needed to make sure that we are managing email records effectively and in accordance with proper disposition. So, one of the reasons that I think it really resonates with agencies is because the way we've introduced this approach is that it can be done by leveraging the existing email systems that agencies already have. So there's no need to go out and purchase a new tool or product. It's a way of managing information given the tools that we have, but there's also another really important aspect to it. So before we were using Capstone to manage email, agencies were required to manage every individual email according to the content of that email. So if you had an email that related to travel records, then that would be managed in accordance with the record schedule covering travel files. So what Capstone does is it makes it easier to manage because it focuses on not the content, but the role of the person who is creating the email. So it's managed at the email account level, and then a disposition is tied to the account. So if you have a senior official, all of the email in that account could be determined to be permanent or historically valuable. And if you have an account for a person who's lower in the organization or maybe not working on mission critical functions, then those emails can be temporary and can be disposed of after a reasonable amount of time in accordance with the record schedule. So what it does is it actually takes the burden off of the user to manage every email according to the content and provides a more systematic and efficient way of managing emails. So we're always looking at different approaches and ways that we can help agencies manage their records more effectively. And we're trying to work on guidance that provides more practical assistance to agencies in how they can manage their records more effectively. And one of the things that, that we have been working on are success criteria. And we developed a success criteria around managing email when Capstone came out in 2016, which provided some very, clear guidance and a roadmap, so to speak, on how agencies can do it. So it was a big change for the National Archives, where we have focused in the past on, what agency should do, what are those requirements, and sort of not only covered that, but also talked a little bit more about how agencies can be effective in implementing those requirements.
I know Lisa's going to talk maybe a little bit about that success criteria. But before I go there, Lawrence, just one quick follow-up. When you said you're working on some guidance that provides more assistance to agencies, where are you with that guidance? Are you, later this summer, later this fall? Do you have a sense yet?
So we're always, whenever we do issue guidance, we always try and issue some frequently asked questions. We try and digest the questions that we get from agencies. And in particular, we have received some questions on the most recent OMB M1921 memorandum. And we have been working through that process, collecting the data and developing some frequently asked questions. And we hope to issue those soon. They have been drafted. We are currently reviewing them, and anything that we do has to be coordinated with the Office of Management and Budget. And we're sort of in the process of developing that, and we hope to be able to get some further guidance out to agencies that will help clarify some of those questions that we keep hearing about implementation.
Yes, the ubiquitous soon in government talk. We know it's tough. Lisa, let me turn to you. NARO released if you will, a white paper, a memo, if you will, criteria for successfully managing permanent electronic records. Talk a little bit about that, because that's really maybe giving agencies a roadmap or a strategy to really achieve this goal.
So we call it a white paper because it's not official guidance, but it was a way to sort of help agencies ask themselves, how do I know if I've been successful? We started with email management, and I sometimes start to laugh now, thinking I'm new folks entering the workforce, and for the first time, and telling them, do you know that 8 years ago we printed and filed email? They would say, what are you talking about? Like, oh yes. So we have moved from printing and filing email to finding more sophisticated approaches that can be automated and say, this is what we're saving and this is how long and how we're doing it, but how do you know if you're successful? So we had some white papers that we've issued with success criteria that start actually asking 4 important questions. The way we look at how do you know you've been successful is, 1, you've got your policies in place. And I know that is, where you would expect the director of policy to start, but you have to start somewhere. You have to know what you're trying to achieve. And then, do you have the systems in place? If you've got the systems, and you can't be building the system, they have to actually be in place and working. And then for us, the key goal to saying I've successfully managed my email over time is that I can find, access, and by that I mean open, read, retrieve, and use that email over time. And if that's 15, 20 years, now you know that that's what you're planning for. And so that's a different question than being like, oh, I need to maintain this email for 180 days and then it gets deleted, versus am I asking the right questions to get to 15 to 20 years? And then the criteria says at the end of the day, can you actually delete that record according to the schedule? And I know that sounds a little strange to say. You'd think people would be chomping at the bit to delete email and save themselves storage and maintenance and access costs. But it's actually one of the more complex things to do, to get agreement as an institution that it's the time to implement that disposition. Hit that delete key and feel comfortable saying, no, I can't retrieve those emails. They have officially been deleted. And then even more important than that to a National Archives employee is saying, were you able to transfer those records electronically to NARA? So now an agency no longer has responsibility for it, but the National Archives gets to keep it in our custody as part of our nation's history. If that transfers actually happened, you've been successful. So it's a criteria that sort of sets up a long goal, and yet you can see different questions in different phases you can ask over time when you look at the criteria. Have I kept my schedule updated? Where am I on the migration? Have I kept it in a format that NARA is going to be able to accept? So that's how we outline that success criteria. And really, it's what we use for email, but it's what we use for all electronic records management. Policy, system, access over time, and then successful disposition.
I know every agency is at a different part of the continuum.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take these criteria for success and apply them against agencies, do you see any sort of trends or more agencies in that, okay, they know what they're trying to achieve, they have some systems in place, but they're not quite at that goal of read, retrieve, email over time, or what do you see from agencies currently?
So we have our annual reporting that we do with agencies. We get a lot of questions and data. And the one question we never ask is, so have you successfully managed your email? That's too simple of a question. It doesn't tell you the story that gets to the trends. So we can tell from trends that most agencies started with their policies and that basic inventory. It's funny to think about, but even 10 or 8 years ago when we said, let's start managing email, one of the questions is, how many email systems do I have? How many legacy collections of email that I retired that system, but I saved the data. So just even getting your head wrapped around, this is the policy and this is how it applies and this is the system. That's where most agencies are scoring high. Policies and getting the systems in place. The lower scores are on the access over time and actually doing the disposition part. That's the part that either they couldn't implement because it wasn't time yet, or there's challenges with deciding, maybe at the time I thought we could delete these after 7 years. Turns out that there is an actual business need or some business value that we can mine for information that we didn't realize 7 years ago when we set some determinations. So that's where it gets to be that interesting correlation between data, information, and records. It's time to delete it, but do we want to do a check and see if we want to reappraise or redetermine if there's new value that can be had from the new technologies and the new tools that are available. So yeah, that's the part that's agencies are still working towards.
All right, plenty to dig out from there. We're going to first take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to a special edition of Ask the CIO, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on Federal News Network.